Hi, Amatilla. We just started recording. Is that okay with you if we record the session?
That's perfectly fine.
Okay, great. I think we're ready to get started. So I want to welcome everyone and thank you for coming and joining us tonight for this panel. This is the second panel that we've had with this title, and we're very glad to have Amatilla Shaw back, who moderated this panel for us last year, and looking forward to having her host again. Amatilla is a recent graduate of our both our undergraduate and graduate program. And she's now a resident writer at BuzzFeed. I'm sure she'll tell you more about that as the panel goes on. But I'm going to hand it over to Amatilla to lead us in discussion, and I look forward to hearing all of your point of view. Thanks for coming.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. I always love coming to stuff for the Diplo School. I ride for y'all for real. So I'm so excited to have this panel again. When we had it last year, it was such a success, and just the conversation was so free flowing and so organic. And so I'm hoping that we can have the same thing this evening. Also, I'm like, my screen is here, but I have a camera here, so don't think I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at all of y'all. And so basically what I would like to do, of course, have us each go one by one, introduce ourselves briefly, because obviously we'll have more opportunities to describe and go more into detail about what we each do, and how our experience was at the School of Diplomacy. But just a brief introduction, your name, when you graduated, where you're from, where you're located right now, and then basically I wanted to go through what your experience was education-wise. So like what made you want to study diplomacy, but we're going to get to that later, and then transition into your careers now. So with that being said, I guess I'll start. My name is Amatilla Shaw. I am a graduate of the School of Diplomacy, obviously. I graduated in 2018 with my bachelor's, and then again in 2020 with my master's. And then after 10 grueling months of applying for jobs in the middle of a pandemic, I was offered the opportunity to be a part of the editorial fellowship at BuzzFeed. And so essentially, I just write all of the time. And now I do a couple of back end stuff in regards to looking at trends and seeing what people are interested in more often than not. Looking at demographics, seeing what people between the ages of 18 through 24 are reading versus the ages of 25 through 34. So it's such an amazing space to be in. And obviously, you know, I'll go into a little more later as the conversation goes on, but I will pass it on to whoever. I don't know if you guys want me to call on you individually or if you just wanted to unmute yourselves, but we can go through each other.
I'll go ahead. Thanks everyone for having me. Wow, and I literally just got a Slack right then. My name is Karina Taylor. I graduated from our master's program in 2016. So Wendy and I overlapped a little bit. And where I studied foreign policy analysis and international organizations. I was a classical civilizations major undergrad. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that. And so then from there came down to DC after graduating, took the Foreign Service exam, didn't pass the first time. While I was temping in a variety of places, I landed at Bloomberg Tax, a product that takes a look at the government's tax policy just in time for the 2017 tax bill. And then in 2019 moved over to Bloomberg Government, where we track government spending against the budget. So I am now a product manager there and have been for the last couple of years. So a great example of the move from looking at public to private, and also how our degree can be applicable to many other disciplines besides maybe the most obvious. So excited to get into all that.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and continue this role with the ladies first. So we thank you for that. I figure that's what you're going with. Hi, everyone. My name is W.E. DeCruz. But when I was at Seton Hall, I was just Wendy Kwanzaa. So that was my maiden name when I was on campus, or Akua. Let me see. I bleed blue, y'all. I was at Seton Hall for 7 years. I did undergrad as a Dr. Martin Luther King scholar. So I did 4 years through MLK. with Dr. Pritchett and all our scholars there. I studied English, I believe, and then I went ahead and became a graduate assistant at Seton Hall under the leadership of Lori Pine in the PR and marketing department. And so I completed both my masters during my graduate assistantship. So I have an MPA, Masters of Public Administration, focusing, I believe, on nonprofit, and then I have a Master's of Diplomacy and International Relations. Hi, Dr. Pritchett. And so got my MA in Diplomacy and International Relations, very similar to maybe some of the experiences those who are viewing us today. I too had a challenge, even though on paper seemed like a pristine student, had a challenge, landing my first employment opportunity. And at the time I was a newlywed and a new mother. And so I didn't have time to keep interning for anyone. I had to generate revenue very quickly. So I decided if they weren't going to hire me, I was going to hire myself. And that was what catapulted me into entrepreneurship. And so I've been in business my entire career postgraduate graduation. And so I've been specializing in technology. And then I'll share more about how technology has catapulted me into doing economic work, more diplomatic work with the UN and such. So happy to be here. Always excited to be back. Thank you, Dean Halpin and Dr. Ruby for the invitation. And so it's a pleasure.
So I guess it's my turn now. So I'm also happy to be here. My name is Russell Brooks. I'm a diplomat, which is natural, I guess, having graduated from the School of Diplomacy. I graduated way back in 2003. I was a part-time student. At that time, I was working at ABC Sports in New York City, and I saw an advertisement for this new school that was being formed, focusing on an area that I had a lot of interest in, diplomacy. And so I took a chance and applied. So this, as I said, this when the school was fairly new, back when I think Dr. Courtney Smith was relatively new to the school. And upon graduation, and then completing my time at ABC, I joined the Foreign Service. I'm a diplomat who has served in a variety of places around the world, and I am currently in the Office of Caribbean Affairs in Washington, D.C. So I look forward to this discussion. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. You all are just so amazing. I'm really just so blessed to share this space with you all this evening. All right, so let's hop right in. First question, very easy, very simple, maybe. What made you want to study diplomacy and international relations? Because obviously we've had such wild and amazing careers thus far, but obviously it all began with diplomacy and international relations. So for you guys, where did that interest first start?
I'll say for me, it was peers sort of leading by example. As I mentioned, I was a classical civilizations undergrad starting out at Howard University. So I was studying very old, very dead languages, very old, very dead societies. And all of my friends were studying what was on the news right now. And in classes, of course, we would often be writing papers where we were trying to draw, connections between the past and the present day. But I was like, no, I want to write about the present. And so when I was finishing up my degree at Florida State, I had the opportunity to take some additional classes. So started taking courses on the history of the term genocide, for example, or some discussions about the oppression of the Black diaspora and how that's an international experience, things of that nature that really built on my experiences as a child in the military, moving around the world to be like, oh, I really want to take more of this global view of my studies for what's next. So then I was put in touch with Dr. Ruby, and the rest is a little bit history as far as coming up. But yeah, that was really what it was. I'd spent many years in the past and was ready to sort of get more involved in the world around me. And this seemed like the best way to do it.
Awesome. I mean, I think similar to you as Karina are impacted by those around me or those connected. My family is from Ghana, West Africa. And so all my life, well, let me say this. I was born here, raised in Ghana. So our parents gave birth to us here, but we were shipped to Ghana for the first few years of our life to really be ingrained in the culture and just be raised by our grandparents. It's just part of our culture. And so my whole entire life, I've been going back and forth, and I began to really witness this dichotomy of life, what was happening back home in Africa as opposed to what was here. And just even the conversation, everyone just naturally assumed that because we were in the US, we were born in the US, that we had this like better life, and that we were, in my family's eyes, rich and wealthy, and really they just didn't understand the challenges that we too had here. And so it was just this wide variety of experiences growing up. And this dichotomy always piqued my interest. But like many of you, perhaps, I just didn't know how to put language to it. I didn't know at the time it was called diplomacy or international relations. And so it wasn't until I was pursuing my graduate program at Seton Hall, when I got the opportunity to be a graduate assistant, I was still deciphering what program to go into. I knew I wanted to support economic development, but that's so broad. Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? How do I put it into language, something tangible that I can digest? And so it was the African Union seminar trip to Ethiopia. I don't know, Dean Halpin, Dr. Ruby, if that's still going on at the school, but we took this trip during the MA program. And it opened my eyes. It was the first time I'd ever walked into a U.S. embassy without it having to do with like a passport or something, getting a passport to go to Ghana. And so that trip, economic development, I still have the pictures today where I was standing in front of the AU and I was like, I'll be back. And I said, next time I won't be a student, and so that was where I was able to put language to diplomacy. But even within that, diplomacy has so many levels, there's so many angles, so many departments, and hopefully we'll get into some of it today. And it's been the last few years as a private sector engager of diplomacy that I've began to understand how I could really promote and foster economic development. So I would say my life's, just being born Ghanaian American was my introduction.
For me, I would say I've always loved politics, history, military science, things of that nature. I've, sort of a nerdy kid that always read a lot about those things. So to some degree, I was always headed in this direction, but I took some detours along the way. One of the things that I've always been interested in as well is sports. And so that was my first career, sports and sports broadcasting in particular. But in my particular case, that allowed me to travel the world. So I, did a lot of events, traveled to a lot of places, worked with a wide variety of people. But at some point, I knew I wanted to get into public service. I watched The West Wing and I thought, I can do that, that sort of thing. And so I knew at some point in time, I wanted to get the opportunity. And fortunately, I've been able to do that. But, I always knew I would head in this direction. It was just a matter of when and how.
I literally have a poster of West Wing quotes in the room I'm standing in, which is my kitchen. It's the first thing people see when they walk in my home. It's a big what's next. I'll have to send you the link.
Okay.
Oh, I love that. I love that each of you mentioned just wanting to know more and wanting to be involved in what was happening around us, because I had a similar journey. Obviously, like for me, my interest was languages. I loved languages. I was like, listen, I'm going to learn all of them. I'm going to become a polyglot and I'm going to be an interpreter at the United Nations. And then I got to a certain point where I was like, well, it's great that I want to work at the UN, but I really want to have a deeper grasp of what I'm interpreting, because it's so easy to just listen to something and then repeat it out loud. But I wanted to be able to really understand everything that went into these discussions that was happening. So I thought, let me learn international relations. And fast forward 6 years later, it's still such a huge passion of mine. But that passion for service, I think it's so important that it's driven all of us into this space of international relations. So that is amazing. I absolutely love that. And then, of course, speaking of what we've been learning at the School of Diplomacy, how do you think that's impacted you in your careers today? So are there any skills that you've kept with you throughout the years? Has there been anything that a particular professor or invited speaker said to you that has still resonated with you throughout your entire career so far? So I know for me, when Nobel Peace Prize winner Lama Gaboe came, I remember such an excellent event. She is absolutely amazing. And I remember a question came up to say, like, okay, well, what do I do? How do I get started? And she said, start from where you're at. Start from right in your backyard. Even though we want to be so involved internationally and across borders, there's still so much that we can do right here at home. And so I constantly think about that. I mean, I don't really get to do that work with BuzzFeed in particular, but in my personal life, I'm still able to get involved with all of my communities that I'm a part of. So that was definitely something that, I still sits with me every single day. And so I would like to know, from you all, what's something that's stuck with you from the time that you started at school diplomacy, the time that you graduated, the time that you got your first job till now?
For me, it's about getting involved and staying that way, sort of staying in the fight no matter where you are. Because I mentioned that I was a military child. I had moved 7 times before I graduated high school. I was tired when I got to undergrad. I was like, I only want to talk to who I want to talk to. I only want to I only want to study what I want to study. I don't really, and that was, a terrible thing to be at Howard and not really want to be involved. And then even when I transferred to FSU, I was like, I'm tired. So then I was out of academia for a couple of years just working, and there's nothing like leaving and being like, I would kill to be back in a classroom. Seton Hall sort of gave me that opportunity to get back in the mix and stay there. So just that ability to, even though I was coming from a different discipline, get involved, not be afraid to look dumb, put in the actual hours to study, as opposed to being like Russell, a kid that liked to read a lot of weird stuff and was like, surely I'll memorize all this. Like, no, you're putting in that work. I didn't pull all-nighters till I got to grad school, and I loved every single one of them. So for me, it was just about sticking your hand out and saying hello. We talk about networking and it sounds so silly, but actually being interested in the people around you, getting involved with them, and then just diving deep on subject matter. This, like many worlds, is more complicated than it looks on the surface, and it's always worth diving deeper. And that before, once again, I'd stayed very surface. So just for me, that's when everybody tries to say that y'all don't have, transferable skills. That is what you have. It's not just the ability to write and present. It's the ability to think deeply about a topic. Lots of things right now are in 280 characters. Diplomats don't think like that, right? We think deep, we draw the connections. So I'm able to do that in my job now as a product manager. My whole job is translating what customers want on a website. Until it sounds like you're doing a little bit of this with the readership stuff that you're looking at, but saying, okay, customers say they want X, they don't know how to make that. How do we turn X into Y for our engineers? How do we keep translating, right? Just, it's a different language, it's coding, which I also don't speak. But just bringing those bodies together. How do we find what common interests are? How do we, it's all still about making sure that the right people are in the right room to have the right conversation. That's going to be universal no matter what. So yeah, it's easier to say what wasn't useful to me in my job, quite honestly.
Yeah, Karina, you mentioned a lot of good points, and so did you, Amatilla. As you were speaking about being able to do things even in your backyard, it reminds me of a motto that I learned along my journey that I keep really close to me, and that is to lose the title and win the experience. Oftentimes we want this title post-graduation that, we work at the State Department of State, or we work at the UN, or we work, and, I didn't experience that right off the bat. And so some people were really concerned for me when they were like, well, you went to school for this, but you're doing this, especially African parents, like, what did I, send you to school for? And so, so it took a lot, and I had to just really hone in on the fact, like, hey, lose the title, win the experience. All right, I don't have the title, but how do I keep doing economic development work? What skill sets do I have that can apply and move that vision forward? And so after reading the book White Man's Burden, which I read as a graduate student with Dr. Frederick McCormick Hale, it transformed my life, because in that book is when I began to really believe in the concept of trade, not aid. Trade, not aid. And so trade, not aid, I began to look into trade, like, what does trade look like, and so that book was an anchor. I didn't know it was an anchor until most recently, when I got into more, when I started working with International Trade Administration. And so, to your point, Karina, it's right. You have to become, after a while, you need to dig deep and become a specialist and not just a generalist. And that's where you add value. And so that's another model that I use based on that anchor, is becoming a specialist and not a generalist. And so I began to specialize in technology and see how technology was impacting trade and economic development. And I thank God for COVID, because COVID heightened the importance of people like myself who know technology. And so it was using technology to help businesses increase exports in the global marketplace is how I began to find my way, working with the United Nations, International Trade Administration, and other departments within our government. And so I think that's that's what I think White Man's Burden from Dr. McCormick Hill's class is what triggered these models and experiences and has led us to me, to where I am today, I would say.
For me, I would say Seton Hall really grounded me in the need for lifelong learning. As I said, I was a part-time student, working during the day, going to school at night. And as you might imagine, that can be difficult. And also you will run into quite a few naysayers who basically will argue, why do you want to do this? There are easier things that you can do. But having gone through it and now joined the State Department, most of us are generalists. Most of us do different things every few years, whether it's a different country or a different assignment, a different job function. We constantly have to learn and we constantly reinvent ourselves to a certain degree. And so having gone through that experience in grad school showed me that that can be done. It showed me the importance of doing that, and certainly provided me the confidence that that's something that you can accomplish. I can't remember his name, but one of the business professors that I had basically said that most people are not going to do one thing over the course of their lives. He said people are going to do maybe 2 or 3 different things. And he has really, really been accurate, in my opinion. During the course of my career, I've been a consular officer. I'm a public diplomacy specialist by Cone in the State Department. I am currently working on environmental issues and disaster response and climate adaptation, reinventing yourself constantly. So Seton Hall really helped me develop the skills to do that.
That's such an excellent point of reinventing yourself, because I know when I was a student, I was always under this impression, even though no one ever told me that the journey of being an international relations major and going into the field of international relations as a professional, no one ever told me that it was linear, but I felt like it was linear for the longest time. I was like, I'm just going to graduate. I'm going to try to take everything that I remembered and I'm just going to apply it in my job. And then that's just going to be it. But it's so important to know that you are not just one thing, and that you cannot pigeonhole yourself, and that there's just so much out there that you can apply everything that you've learned at the School of Diplomacy to where you are now. And like I said, like I work at BuzzFeed, so it's media, entertainment. I mean, we do nothing with international relations, diplomacy at all. But even like when I was a GA, working with the Department of Marketing and Communications, I got a lot of writing experience. And I got a lot of experience in just talking to people and seeing what people are interested in and seeing what resonates with people. And that's been such an easy transition to apply to BuzzFeed, since we have such a huge audience, but I know that I can still tap on different parts of my identity to reach different people and pick people's brains and see what people are interested in. So it's such an amazing point.
And Amatella, can I tease something out? Just
absolutely,
remembering that it is Black History Month in our audience. That linear thing, I think, happens a lot. Doesn't necessarily matter what generation of college your family might be, or what, if you have a family that has been working in one context for a long time, whatever their jobs were, they know that job, that industry, but I know I was socialized to believe, well, you go to school, and then if you have the piece of paper, then that's like the next step. And I think sort of what I'm hearing from all of us is that, and what I'm sure other folks on the line are learning, is that it's not just that. It's the little left turn and the little right turn. It's the GA ship and the thing that you didn't do already, or Russell was like, I love sports, I'm going to travel the world. He's had a whole nother life since then. I'm sure for however many years they were like, Russell is the sports guy.
Yes.
That's the guy that works for NBC Sports. And now, you might have friends from 10 years ago, they're like, you work where, you do what? So I think that there also is that idea, whether it, WE was talking about those African parents, some of those professions, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a banker, whatever. Yeah. For me, it was, you're going to be a teacher, right? Yeah. Everyone, family comes from the South. Oh, you're going to be a teacher. You're going to work for the city. You're going to, there are these we grew up with these ideas of clear paths. You go A, then B, then C, then D. I think something that maybe culturally for us is exciting but a little scary to embrace is that it won't be linear, because we do go home to those parents and that family that's like, so what are you doing now? I thought you studied XYZ.
Yes.
So I think that is something that maybe other folks don't deal with as much. They'll be like, oh, great, you got a job, where are you? But for us, it is more of this like, so what are you doing? Because like you already explained the first thing to me. Now you're doing something else.
Right.
And so it's not that your family doesn't support you, but they're kind of like, what's going on? So that's just like another thing in the background that I was like, oh, everybody did go through that.
Yes. So accurate, Karina. Oh my gosh, so accurate. Yeah. But it changes after a while when they start to really see you making progress. And
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it took a lot of explaining to tell people what my transition was like. It was like, you just graduated in international relations and now you're working for this media company. Like how do the two relate? And it's like they do relate. Let me explain it to you for the 10th, 20th time that they relate in a way like and that how like I'm literally able to apply everything that I'm interested in and also everything that I've learned at the School of Diplomacy. And it doesn't mean that I'm not interested. I just took a different path. So but excellent. So now I want to dive a little bit deeper into our experiences at the School of Diplomacy, not just as students of diplomacy, but as Black students of diplomacy. So I wanted to know what were some of the obstacles, if any, that you faced as a Black student, and how did you overcome them, if they were something to be overcome? So I know for me, major obstacle was the sheer fact that a lot of the literature that we were reading were not from Black scholars. They were white scholars talking about Black communities, Black countries, but I never hardly read from Black scholars about these issues. Or if we had visiting speakers from State Department, Foreign Service, wherever, they never looked like me. Or even something as simple as speech, being in my classes and feeling like, okay, if I try to code, I have to code switch. I can't really talk how I would like to talk, because then my peers will think that, okay, what is she saying? Like what she's saying it's not articulate, or it's not the place for it, despite the fact that I'm saying the exact same thing, just with different words. And so that was something that like I had to go through. And I mean, I guess, how did I overcome that? Connecting with other Black students and knowing that while this was my experience and while it may have not been the best experience, I still had that support system. And so that way, obviously, like once we were gone from the School of Diplomacy, we would still kind of instill these ideas in each other to be like, you don't have to code switch every time to get your point across, because you are educated, you are meant to be here. This is a part of your journey, and like if people aren't receptive to that, that's not on you. And so I'm just curious to know, have there been any obstacles, and if so, how did that impact like your experience at the School of Diplomacy?
Well, I think it's perfect that WE and I are both here, because it's kind of two different sides of the coin. Because for me, I will say that some of our sisters from the diaspora were like, you go here, I don't see you in the public health classes. We're all here, like you're not. And I was like, I'm in the foreign policy class, and they're like, oh, the white guys, and I'm like, well, yeah. I wanted to be, but there would be like these breakdowns, that it's like a lot of our Asian brothers and sisters, they're in the international organizations. A lot of our brothers and sisters from OCONAs that are of the Black diaspora, they're in public health, they're looking at economic development, those types of things. And I was like, I'm not a doctor or a finance major. I wouldn't be there. I can read and I can put pieces together. I'll stay here. But that was just an interesting like intra thing to be like, oh, I'm not meeting other Black people's expectations. I've never had that before. And sort of like explaining like, no, I'm here not to not be with y'all just because this is my interest. That was just like an interesting and kind of wonderful education just for me, because I was a military child, but my father was an officer. So we were the only chocolate chip in the cookie a lot of times. So I didn't often have an experience with other Black folk, and then especially with other Black folk from the diaspora. So that was fantastic. But I was also like, oh, there's a club within a club. This is exciting. Also new. So it was more like learning about that and relating to a community that looked like me but had a completely different experience. And having just the different expectations there, I think was actually a huge part of my education, a really valuable one, that I've brought into my professional life as well.
Yeah, no, I can see that, and I like you said, I think our experiences were similar but different because I had been on Seton Hall's campus for so long that I was very
you were an institution in and of yourself. Yeah.
I was very heavily integrated with all the different BSUs and AUs and Martin Luther King. I mean, I've been on Seton Hall campus for so long. I knew of every group or was part of it. So I think for me, my challenge was once I got clear that diplomacy was the route and that Africa was going to be my region of specialization, I did feel limited by the course options that I had during my program. And I really understand how limited it was until I started seeing what other schools and universities had. And some of my fellow Diplos or those that I engage with within this network from different universities talk about different classes and such that I didn't necessarily have the option to. And, I understand curriculums are also developed based on interests. And so perhaps this wasn't an interest. And that's not something that is limited to the School of Diplomacy at Seton Hall. I sit on the board of the National Export Council. And so we are the liaison between the U.S. Commercial Services Office. And so we help U.S. businesses increase their exports. Exports means doing business in other countries, selling your product or service. So I sit on this national board, and I'm one of 2 Black people on this board. And then I'm the youngest person on the board. And so I'm the only one that talks about technology on this board as it pertains to Web 3.0. And so for example, there's a conference in May, and I am leading or curating this U.S. Africa Relations panel. But no one is really talking about Africa because there's no one to pioneer it. So I understand that campus, perhaps there just wasn't an interest for Africa as much. And so I did feel limited by the curriculum. Dr. Frederick McCormick Hale, she did a wonderful job sending me books and literature, and the AU trip was a great, igniter for me, but I did have to look outside. And I'm noticing that that's the case in certain networks that I'm involved in. I know the administration now has, there's tons of new initiatives, Prosper Africa, and all these different things now that, especially with COVID and the whole China supply chain, people are looking at other regions, but it wasn't the case back when I was studying it. I just didn't feel there was an emphasis. And so that was a challenge, especially when I knew that was the region I wanted to impact. So that was probably my biggest hurdle, one of my biggest hurdles starting early on.
Yeah, you do have to kind of cobble it together. And even like what Amatola was saying, just the perspective, even if it's a region that's quote unquote well covered, you're still sitting here like, well, okay, you're calling this sectarian violence, but like just all the language and there was a lot of literature analysis that I found myself doing to be like, okay, that's what we said, but thank you, Father Muses, who I know is on tonight, for the critical thinking on teasing some of that apart, but like just going even deeper and being like, well, this is how it's been written about, but is that really the way that the people there view the conflict? Almost never. Yeah. Like it's a weird outsider perspective that you're kind of fighting through.
Right.
So that's kind of the challenge. But again, there has to be an interest, and there has to be, because you can have classes. Then it was also a challenge because sometimes there was 2 courses I wanted to take, but they were during the same semester, and so I couldn't. And so there was this overlap, and but otherwise, I mean, clearly it did a good job getting me excited and interested in this field. But if there's anything we can add and add value to, it was just more selections, more 54 countries, right, across the continent. Yep. So much to cover. So yeah.
So I'm going to be a little handicapped in this area because as a part-time student, I can't really honestly say, that I encountered an obstacle or something along those lines. But I will say is I think that's a point well taken about the limitations in most international relations programs as it concerns what I'll call some of the non-traditional areas of study. And by that, I mean that most programs are going to focus on Europe and these days Asia. maybe to some degree Latin America, depending on the program and depending on the funding for that particular institution, maybe the Middle East. But Africa will be neglected most times in most places. There are some institutions I'm aware of that have a bit more offerings as it pertains to Africa, but in the main, it's an area that's really neglected. And so even though it wasn't per se an obstacle for myself, I'm going to take a little credit in terms of inspiring my children to sort of follow in my footsteps a little bit. And one's a Foreign Service officer, the other one works for USAID. And because we traveled the world, they decided they wanted to get into those areas. And while they were in school, yes, they noticed the fact of what was highlighted and what was missing, and were quite outspoken about it. And so, yes, I know the fact that these places, these areas of the world are not well covered. My daughter in particular, who went to Georgetown and studied Arabic there, and brought up the fact that in her readings, there was very little mention of race as a problem in the Arab world. Something that we know to be the case because I've worked in the Arab world. She's traveled in the Arab world, so we know that to be the case. But it wasn't mentioned at all, and so she brought that to the fore, and tried to correct that. And I give her a lot of credit and praise for doing that. And my son in his studies did something very, very similar. So that's something that I think that in the academic community, we need to improve upon. That's something that is an important part of the world. Since I worked in Africa, I know it's one of the fastest growing continents with an extremely young population. That will be even more important as we go into the future. So the academic community needs to catch up, I would say.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I love that you all brought up things that are missing in the curriculum, because obviously as students in this field, we want to see ourselves represented, and we want to make sure our experiences and all of our learnings are so well-rounded and thorough. And so when that piece is missing, then you feel like, how can you truly, fulfill everything that you've learned with, some missing pieces in the background. And this conversation came up back in 2020 when we were having like these school-wide meetings, and obviously I was a fresh alum at the time, but it was still fresh on my mind. And we talked a lot about how race wasn't brought up a lot in all of our courses, and that when it was brought up, it was brought up in let's talk about this civil war in this country and how race impacted them. But then when it came to how race still impacts us here in this country, it was more like, well, it's more of a domestic issue. That's more, political science. We don't have to talk about that, but we do have to talk about that, because if we want to become these, worldly individuals who are going to be engaging with so many different people from so many different places, we have to know all of these dynamics. And so it was a huge conversation, because a lot of, especially African-American students, myself included, we felt like that conversation of race, especially here in this country, was always shot down. It was just like, that's not an issue of international relations, so we're not going to talk about it. And it's like, but it is an international relations issue, because while, we're talking about Black people here, the entire diaspora is suffering from these same issues. And so it still applies, you know what I mean? And so I love that, or I don't love it, but I appreciate that you guys brought up, those gaps in education, because that's very important as a student.
Yeah, and I think that there's this whole idea in our discipline of context.
Exactly.
Right? There's this whole idea of context. Everything that's going on right now with Ukraine, which, oh my goodness, WE, we were in school when they were doing this the first time. How? But I looked at that the other day and was like, oh my goodness. But there is context for that. If we are taught that everybody is a rational actor, then the why of that is not understandable maybe to us internationally, but where it is a domestic issue, it makes total sense. So, why would he do that? Because there are domestic concerns. So everybody's international issue is somebody else's domestic concern. And I think what we fall prey to is a Western exceptionalism, definitely an American exceptionalism, that, yeah, other people have issues, but whereas, goodness, this might have been an Onion article years ago reporting on Ferguson, which also happening while I was there at the School of International Relations, reporting on Ferguson as if they were reporting on some of these countries that we are saying are underreported on. And it's like, how would you describe that violence? Is that sectarian? They're, all the same images that we would get on CNN, and that's all we would get. That's all we were getting of that conflict. So honestly, I think some of this, really tough pendulum swinging that we've seen between 2020 and then 2021, 2022 is people trying to pretend that that is not the case, right? To say, oh, we're still exceptional. It's still different. And it's like, no, we as international relations majors, we'd be able to map every single one of these conflicts to at least some aspect of something that we have studied where these are long simmering tensions, the types of words you might use in a BuzzFeed article, have been here in the same way that they are in these other international contexts, but we have these exceptionalism blinders on that make it so that we won't pull those things into relationship with each other and into discussion with each other when it's critical to how we understand them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so then keeping this conversation going, talking about like obstacles and barriers as Black students or Black professionals, switching gears to talking about our careers, have any of you faced any barriers to entry in the career that you're in, or are you still facing any barriers to entry? So like myself, I mean, obviously, I think working at BuzzFeed, a lot of people would think like, oh, it's so diverse, which it is. However, it's still majority white. I'm still probably the only Black person that is on half of the calls that I'm on. And then even beyond that, I'm probably one of 2 Muslims in like the entire company, maybe, that I engage with. And so it can still be a very isolating experience, despite the fact that, of course, like there are other Black people that work at BuzzFeed. Do I engage with them on a daily basis? No. And so there still are those barriers being Black in this space of like media and entertainment, because obviously, we want people to be represented, but on the back end, how much representation is actually happening? And so I want to know from you guys, have you faced anything similar? Are you still facing anything similar? If not, good on you. Let me come to that career, but let me know.
No, I was gonna say there's layers to it. I mean,
absolutely.
Like, there's challenges being a millennial. There's challenges being a Black woman, like being Black and being a Black woman. And then for me, being in the tech space, because within the tech space, there's a very small percentage who are, Black, and then women. And so, yeah, we've had and then being private sector, running our own thriving business. And so, for example, you'll hear things like, let me see, I was invited to speak at the U.S. Africa Business Summit in Mozambique. That's where the memorandum was signed for Prosper Africa and the work that's being done between U.S. Africa relations. And so I attended as a speaker, but I think, just speaking and networking, it's so easy for someone to say, oh, what company are you working for that you're here for? It's like not a norm to be a business owner in private sector and to be invited to speak at such a pretty large, event with a lot of U.S. Delegates. And so you hear that a lot, especially in our space. And I think the best way to navigate it for myself, the best way to navigate, number one, is just like know your stuff. Right. And just know your information, know your stuff, and always be ready so you don't have to get ready. And I think the knowledge and the information and then the execution of the work that you do speaks for itself so much so as people can kind of look beyond these initial filters that stop them from engaging, fully with you because you fit these categories. The challenge too within our space, and y'all let me know if this is true, you don't really see a lot of, maybe more and more today, and I think sometimes we're in the space so we see and we know these people, but when I step outside of the space, there's not a lot of people talking about, I want to go into international relations, or I want to be a diplomat. I don't hear young Black girls saying that, and so it's not normalized enough for them, and so that's a challenge within itself. So when you get into it, you're already starting at a deficit. So these are some of the things that hopefully we can work on starting as a young as a young age. My daughter now, she'll know because she's always seen me traveling and talking, writing speeches and this and this and that. So for her, diplomacy, international relations is a common conversation. Like yourself, Karina, your dad, you traveled because of the military, so you had an awareness. So those are some of the challenges, and we deal with them every day. I don't have an answer, but I know that what I can control is the way I engage and interact. So re-anchor people into normalizing Black women in technology, doing economic development work, working with these entities. So yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, as WE was saying, there are layers to it and levels to it, because there's the internship conversation. Can you or can't you? You mentioned that at the top. It's like, these loans are due like today.
Yeah, this doesn't
I
work.
gotta make some money today. I don't have somebody to stay with today. Like it's like, what are you going to be doing? You were in school. That's nice. You went to school. Many of us were told you went to school to get a job. So that becomes the conversation. And we have so many people, even domestically, talking about this as an issue, but there were, dream internships that stayed a dream because you were like, there's just no way. And that is, of course, a race class intersection, which is probably a whole nother panel. But before you get to that, then you get to just even with temping, what people think you're capable of. I had a great control group because I had a bunch of friends that all graduated at the exact same time with the exact same credentials, and to see where folks landed or didn't land. One of Dean Halpin's assistants, Audra DiCataudo, a great friend of mine now, she joined the company that I was working at, and thankfully, without me having to ask, once they realized what they were paying her, they had to give me a raise. I'd been there a year and a half longer than her.
Wow.
And had worked for them before that as a temp, and knew my stuff and was onboarding her, had recruited her. But even that, we talk about, oh, your network. When they said that her initial position was going to be open, and I said, oh, I have a friend. And they said, oh, like, I mean, it's nice that you have a friend, but so, there's supposed to be this idea of, your network and putting people on, but if you're inside of an organization that doesn't believe that you're going to have a professional network because of how you look, and you all know, I sound like Taylor Swift right now. I know it for sure. Like I've supposedly done all the things I'm supposed to do. I look and sound the way I'm supposed to, but there was still this idea of, oh, the person in her network won't be who we're looking for. It was a white Italian girl from New York. They didn't know.
Right.
So so there you have these odd perception barriers that aren't spoken, but they're there, and you find yourself having to just sort of move your way through. I work at an organization that has a lot of folks that are those specialists. They're tax attorneys, or they specialize in a type of law, and so they can be a little bit passive aggressive. I'm not. So that would then become, it's like, oh my goodness, you're so strong, you're delivering, but this one person who's been here a long time, the way you ran that meeting, and I'm like, 6 months ago, y'all are still on that? But this is their comfortable kingdom, and now they don't really know what to do with you. So I mean, that, Amatala, you were talking about code switching. My default, I thought, was their code, and just with the packages coming in, it still wasn't. So knowing your stuff, as was said, is critical, because people are going to sometimes tag you just on delivery, even though you believe that you have already acclimated. There's no such thing as being able to acclimate, to make it invisible, to make it's for someone they won't have had experience with someone like you. And so you're going to just have to overcome that. But yeah, and that's a constant. And I've been at the same company since 2016, and still meeting new people for whom it's like, oh, no, you're not comfortable yet. Oh, okay. We're going to have to find another point of common ground. And the diversity, equity, inclusion stuff, I'll also leave for another panel, because that, my goodness. Oh my.
Wow.
Okay. Well, on this topic, there was a very interesting PBS program, I think it was last week, called The American Diplomat.
Yes, I watched that.
Very good.
So good.
So you saw the history of the State Department. It is an elitist institution, okay? As they said in the program, traditionally, it has been pale, it's male, and usually from Yale, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Yep.
It has changed somewhat, but not enough, okay? There are more people of color,
Yeah.
but not nearly as many as you would think. It is more, there are more females than in years past, but still, probably not as many as you would think. Okay. Now, there's a variety of reasons for that. Okay. So I'm not going to say that all of it is due to discrimination, racism, etc. But I will say that does exist still in the
Yeah.
State Department. It precludes some people from getting into the State Department. It hinders people from moving up in the State Department.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for people of your generation, a lot of them are not willing to stay around and put in years and years of service, as has traditionally been the case in the State Department, when these very, very bright and talented people have other opportunities available to them.
Yeah.
And so for this variety of reasons, um, this institution is very, very slow to change.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem. Okay? Because as you saw in that documentary, it really is important for people around the world to see a diversity of faces and a diversity of voices representing the United States.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as a person who has done that in a variety of places, I know it's also you also run into a problem when you uh, present an image that a lot of people around the world don't associate with the United States.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Many diplomats are going, or African American diplomats are definitely going to tell you that people will say to them, I want to speak to the real American
Mm-hmm.
or the real diplomat because you're not that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's a problem. It's a problem when you have to represent your country when it's going through episodes like a couple years ago, and you find yourself, if not defending what's taking place, but at least you have a special burden to explain what's taking
Mm-hmm.
place.
Good.
A burden that many of your colleagues don't feel the same necessity to do or to undertake. So that can be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So I can describe a variety of challenges that the African American or just the diplomat of color has to encounter today that is not so much different than that people of color faced in the State Department, this traditional institution in the 1950s and the 1960s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's so important that you brought up not looking like what people think you should look like. Because I mean, I had pretty much that experience when I was at the school of diplomacy, undergrad through grad school. Because I'm African American, I was, too American for the African kids, too African for the American kids, right? So it was like this weird in between space to be in. And then also oh my gosh, my brain is like short wiring. Just having to explain my identity was such a weird experience because obviously people are like, oh, like where are you from? So I'm like, oh, I'm from Newark. You're like, like where are you from? Like where your family's from? And I'm like, we're from Jersey. Like that's it. And they're like, no, like what country? I'm like, the United States. Like, and then we have to have another conversation of like, so do you want me to just flat out tell you that my ancestors were enslaved? Like, is that the conversation that you want to have right now? Which I don't think that's what you were going for.
It wasn't.
It never is. And so it never is, you know, and it's such an interesting, you know, place to be in. Because, and then that's how, you know, imposter syndrome sets in, and you're just like, well, they're treating me as if I don't belong, so maybe I don't. And it's such a terrible space to be in, and it takes so much to get out of that. But I really am grateful for the people that I connected with, regardless of, you know, what part of the African diaspora they're a part of, to kind of reassure me that, you know, you belong in this space, and that, you know, regardless, that you may not look like what a diplomat is supposed to look like, but you are a diplomat. And, you know, who cares of what they're supposed to look like? This is what they look like. That they look like you. And so it's such a great point to bring up. So thank you all for that.
Yeah.
And I think about that idea, and this has been tackled a lot. I know, Matola, you're probably seeing this conversation go around at BuzzFeed a lot, of objectivity when we're talking about what the diplomat is supposed to look like, that the diplomat is neutral. You know, that there's this neutrality, objectivity, all of these words to say that you should and can be at an emotional remove from these events that are going on in the world, because all of it is academic to you, or all of it is just policy to you. It is not, there's not necessarily like a rooted interest. And so even sometimes in class, if you were expressing the perspective of that rooted interest, it was, well, you're being subjective. Well, you're not being neutral, where you're, and it's like, well, we talk about policy positions and position papers and all these things all the time, but you're always supposed to say, oh, but both sides have equal weight, you know, and so you would have this challenge of that. I'll tell you, some of my best diplomatic skills were developed attempting to deliver that impassioned perspective that I had about something that was going on, and take all the emotion out of it, because otherwise it would become like, okay, yeah, we know it's Ferguson, or yeah, we know it's somebody else, or okay, yeah, you're going through it, but like here we're talking about realism, here we're talking about objectivity, here, and it's like, all of these policies impact people, all these policies impact human beings. We can't over intellectualize that. I don't believe, if policy is going to be effective, over intellectualize that. But that was like a fight and a tension, you know, even in the level of like class discussion, that it's like, oh yes, we want these diverse perspectives, but it's like you're supposed to sort of tamp it down. Even in the midst of these things going on, Russell, what you were saying made me think about that. That's like, you have to sort of go around the world and be like, yes, at home it is tense. It's like, kind of leave it there. It's like,
well, I'm going to disagree a little bit in that we don't have to really be, quote, neutral. You know, we don't give equal weight to the people who are racist. We don't. Okay. In this day and age, we don't give equal weight to the people who are, you know, who discriminate against gay and lesbian people. We don't give equal weight to that. Those who are sexist, you know, those who are anti-Semitic. Okay.
That's good.
Now, we recognize that our culture in the United States is different than some of the other parts of the world that we work in. Okay? So we have the necessity to explain how we have evolved to where we are. We don't claim that we were perfect. Okay. We admit that it has taken us considerable time, considerable pain and effort to get to where we are. Okay. And hopefully that provides inspiration to people in other parts of the world who are going through a similar journey. But we are not totally objective and neutral. You know, we have values, we have principles, and we are expected to defend them.
That's good.
and I think that's an important difference between public and private. Private, it's still, well, it's where the money resides. And that's been, I know, a tough thing for me during this period, is that you can see folks like yourself that are making that effort to make it clear that America has values that it's always trying to live up to. And in this private space, it can become about, well, yes, but, or what, and you just see things get excused and excused and excused and excused and excused. So even though, as we saw a couple of years ago, you have all these businesses that express similar values to the ones that the U.S. government expresses, but they don't, their effort to meet them is so much less.
Yeah, there's definitely a dichotomy between private and public sector for sure. With the private and being someone who's in a private side, but really from a different position because I'm in leadership. But yeah, I have seen some private sector, depending upon, like you said, who's impacting their bottom line, make choices differently as opposed to maybe public sector where you can actually speak up for certain things. So there's definitely a dichotomy between private and public sector, how they engage in this space of international relations and diplomacy. That is for sure. We see it with, even with these mandates, with different mandates that are being pushed out and how people are responding to it and so forth. So I think to your point, Karina, I understand. And also to your point, I was going to ask you, Russell, have you experienced a scenario or a situation where you've had to, like where things were a little tense and you had a position that maybe was not as received by the other party? I was just curious to know from a diplomatic experience, you've worked all over. Have you experienced that? And what did you do to navigate it? Not to take your questioning away, I'm gonna tell her. But
no, it's fine. Go ahead. I love this conversation.
You're a diplomat here. Everything I do with diplomacy is like private sector, so I have a lot of freedom and flexibility to do it the way I want. If I want to take that opportunity, I just don't take the opportunity, But I'm just curious to know from Russell's side, like, can you give us a real experience of that?
Okay. Well, I think I can think of two. So during our discontent a couple of years ago about issues of race, we felt, I think Black diplomats around the world felt that it was important to explain what was going on to foreign audiences. I was in Africa at that time. And so I thought it was incumbent upon me to come up with an idea for a program to put things in context. And I thought I was uniquely able to do that because one, as you can tell from the gray hair, I've seen a few things during the course of my life. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. I can recall the 1967 riot, and I know, basically what precipitated the riot. I understood the after effects in Newark, New Jersey. So I thought, I could really speak to what was going on, and I took the opportunity to do that, even though, frankly speaking, a lot of people, especially people who are not of color, felt very, very, very uncomfortable with raising that topic. But people saw the news every day. They saw what was going on, and they needed to understand it. They needed to understand our history. And so we organized a program in Nigeria, and it was extremely well received. So I'm glad we took the chance to do that. At the same time, I also knew that it was a bit uncomfortable having to explain some of the actions of our prior president around the world. Now, as a government employee, we work for the country, and we defend the Constitution. We are not beholden to a particular individual who holds the office. Okay. Some of us are political appointees, but in the Foreign Service, you are a professional diplomat and you serve whomever is who holds the office at that particular time. So I came into the Foreign Service during the Bush administration, okay, and then obviously served the Obama administration and the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration.
Okay.
I serve the American people. Now, trying to explain that to people around the world can be difficult at times. And especially when a president does certain things or says certain things that seems to go against our traditional values, that's a hard situation to be in. Some people in the department determined that they could not do this, and they chose to leave. And I totally understand that. At the same time, I also understand that it's incumbent upon us, if we're professionals, to be able to navigate this, okay? To defend our values regardless of who's in office. And to be honest, I'm glad I stuck it out, okay? And serve the current administration, and we will see what presents itself in the future. But I think we have to show that example for our fellow Americans as well as people around the world.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, my mother always said if somebody gives you a seat, you can't give it up. So, we were talking about how there aren't enough of us there, specifically of us there. So I'm happy that folks like you stayed.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. That's always insightful. I know, from private sector and engaging, especially in Africa, there was a different sentiment when certain things were being said, and people who just weren't informed would kind of rebuttal certain remarks and will say, your president and they would just, it was just different. It was a different energy. And I think everybody was walking around with on tippy toes with doing business and engaging, and we just didn't know what was, we just didn't know. We just didn't know. So it was hard. It was challenging to navigate, but like you said, just being rooted, navigating, understanding what you stand for, and moving forward. And so like this too shall pass. So this is that. Thank you for that insight. From
one of the more interesting aspects, and you may know this because you have family in Ghana, but in Nigeria of all countries, Trump was very popular.
Yeah.
He's one of the few. It was one of the few countries in the world where he was popular. Russia, for obvious reasons, Israel, Nigeria. And you say, why Nigeria? But nevertheless, oftentimes we run into people who say, I like your president. I like the things he says. I like his style, et cetera, et cetera. And even though for me, on a personal level, I felt quite different. But again, it's not about my feelings, my political beliefs. It's about explaining our values, explaining our history, and helping people put it into context.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amatullah, is it okay if we move into small groups now? So I want to make sure that we have the opportunity that everyone gets to network a little bit and chat. And we've had some really good discussion in the chat. So I want to give our audience members the opportunity to keep asking questions and get to talk. So if you don't mind, I'm going to open up the small group sessions now, and each one of our panelists is in a different room. So you should get a note in a second that says you can enter the small room.
Okay.
While Dean Halpin is doing that, can I just take just 1 second to interrupt? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but this has been just an amazing session. I remember each of you as students, and to see where you are now is just, I have this huge smile on my face. So this is just really impressive. And it made me think of a famous line that's by like the least diplomatic person ever. And that would be Darth Vader. There's a moment in the original Star Wars movie where he's battling Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Death Star, and and Darth Vader says to Obi-Wan Kenobi, now the student has become the master, or something to that effect. And that's my impression from this session. My first interaction with each of you, it was as a student, and now I really see you as masters of your careers in the different areas of knowledge that you've built, and how much I've learned tonight. So this is definitely one of those full circle moments, and I just applaud each of you. So very well done, and I know we're all in for a treat in the breakout room. So yeah, my round of applause. Very well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take the UN summer session class, y'all. It's fun.
UN summer session class. Love it.
So good.
So good.
Actually, WE, you would be maybe not surprised to know that your testimonial that you wrote after your summer experience is still up on the website. If you go take a look, it's still there. Yeah.
So Courtney, I left you out. If you want to join any of the meetings, you should be able to click on the breakout room thing at the top, and then you can see the open rooms.
I'm just looking for the right icon here.
Oh, you know what? Maybe wait. Let me put you in. Maybe you're not a presenter yet. Hold on.
No, I'm
Okay.
not. I'm actually an attendee. So that's why.
Sorry.
Okay.
Hold
Yeah.
on, I'll just make you a
I
presenter.
didn't know where I was supposed to look.
Yeah, now you should be able to see a breakout room thing. Hope.
Let's see here. Oh, maybe I have to dismiss that. Maybe it's under the 3 dots.
Pierre, do you need help getting into a room?
Yes, I was, but I don't know what happened. I just put rejoin the room.
Oh, okay, hold on. Which room were you in?
And then I didn't have the time to see where I was because they said rejoin. I put rejoin and they just put me out.
Okay, let me assign you to a room.
Okay.
I just want to look at your screen and see where you see it, because I'm not sure what icon I'm on.
Yeah, it's possible that it doesn't allow you to.
Oh,
I thought
is it
if I
this one?
didn't.
Is it that one?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
one.
I don't have that icon. I'll go double check.
I
but
thought
don't think-
if I didn't assign you that you would be able to jump from room to room, but I would have to assign you to a room. But
That's
if you're
all right,
gonna if you're gonna do emails anyway.
Yeah, I'll probably do emails for a few minutes.
Okay.
I sent thank you notes to deans and cabinets today, and some of them have been. I did it before the session started, and some of them started replying, and I was like, oh, I'll do that while I'm in the session, but it was too good, and I was paying too. I was trying to follow it too closely, so I couldn't do that. So,
Gotcha.
Okay. Oh, is that Dean Halpin? Recording. Uh-oh, Dean Halpin or Dean Smith? Let me see. Let me reassign you. Okay, I see that message.
Sorry, I think I just reassigned you, so let's see if it works.
Okay. Oh, Dean Smith, I heard what you were saying and I'm so excited. Thank you for that update. It cut off when you were speaking.
Oh yeah, no, it's still there. If you go to the program website, you will see that it still has. Oh, that's all
Shut
right.
that off again. Sorry.
That's all right. She knows. Okay. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Okay. Bye. I'm sorry to our guest on the phone that I can't assign you to a breakout room. It doesn't allow me to assign people who join us by phone. So unfortunately, I can't get you into one of these small groups. But thank you for joining us.